else. So we'll continue to try to figure out exactly what the situation is. Is the city safe right now as far as the Sugar Bowl is concerned? They have postponed it. It is an ongoing situation right now, and clearly fluid.
Yes, very fluid. And right now we do have some expert advice and opinions right now from former Secret Service agent Don Lane. You were here listening to that presser with us. What was your biggest takeaway from that?
I thought there was a real lack of specificity here. You know, we didn't really find out anything necessarily new that I would have liked to have learned. For instance, if there are other folks involved, you know, and look, let me say this before I say that. I understand that law enforcement has to, you know, draw a line between what they release to the public in terms of an active investigation so that it doesn't compromise an investigation. That's obvious. But I'd like to learn a little bit more about, you know, how many folks are we talking about that may be involved other than this one individual? How far does this thing go, you know? What other resources are being brought in to ferret that out and find out how many folks there may be? Do they even know, you know? And so I think a little bit of a lack of specificity. I'm not sure if that's by design or because the information isn't in yet. But I sure hope we find out the answers to some of those questions.
Let me ask you this, because when you hear them talk about hunting down the bad guys, it brings to mind anyone who's watching at home that there are bad guys still out there.
Yeah.
And you hear that there was an improvised explosive device potentially in the truck, and that police had found apparently 2 other IEDs that they were trying to determine their viability. Yeah. Viability, one way or another. I mean, we've seen terrorists make a bomb with a pressure cooker.
Right.
To know that there were other potential IEDs out there, that there potentially are other bad guys out there, is that something that should concern the citizens of New Orleans and the visitors that are here right now?
Well, I think any time that there may be other terrorists out there, it's certainly everybody should be concerned about it. And that is kind of what I heard, that there, you know, are other folks involved. You know, I think what needs to be known is, did these folks just help with this event in the periphery, maybe do some you know, intelligence on it or some surveillance, and then let this guy know it was good to go in there? Or are there other sites that they're targeting actively? And is that what we're investigating? So, yeah, you know, I do think it was a good idea to shut the game down tonight in light of what I just heard, for sure.
So, and let me ask you that, because, you know, they haven't canceled it, they postponed it for 24 hours. Does that give you some reassurance that they haven't really, you know, shut down any other events today? Is there reassurance knowing that, and from your background, understanding that maybe there isn't that imminent threat?
I would certainly hope so. You know, I would hope that if law enforcement has information that there are, you know, active folks out there trying to perpetrate other acts of terrorism, that they would put you know, a total lock on the city of New Orleans. So hopefully that's not the case, and I would, it would be unprecedented if that were the case for them to not say that and lock the city down. So yes, I feel like, you know, more than likely there may be some other folks involved, but hopefully just for this event and on the periphery, not necessarily planning other events or other terrorist attacks.
And Don, I know that when we spoke earlier, we were talking about the timing of when this happened. It happened exactly at 3:11. That's according to the FBI and other officials. But again, looking at if they are looking for other people involved, could that have been a strategic timing? Is that a question that would have to be asked? Is that something that would have to look into further for this situation?
Sure, you would always look into the timing of why it happened at a certain time in terms of, you know, was there a target they had in mind? You know, one of the questions I had is why, if the person was going to do this, why not do it a little earlier when there may have been more people involved? So you just don't know at this point if, you know, what time he showed up at the scene. Perhaps he showed up right before he perpetrated this act. We don't know yet. And those are kind of the details that we need to know before those questions can be answered.
So clearly this is something that there will be questions out there for some time, and you heard Senator Kennedy say, you know, once the answers are ready, he'll make sure that those are said. A lot of platitudes were spoken at that podium. It's understandable. This is on a national level at this point. What should the city leaders be doing right now to not only ensure the safety of the public, but continue to ensure that this doesn't leave a stain on the city?
I think the most important thing they can do is work with their law enforcement counterparts to learn what direction this investigation is headed in. Are there other potential attacks or attackers out there? That's very important for them to know in order to secure the safety of the folks of New Orleans and to show that we are a safe city. So really close contact with law enforcement is vital. And then from that point, listening to what they say very, very strictly. And if you need to lock things down, lock them down. Sure, does it upset folks, who have a lot of plans? Obviously. But when talking about the potential loss of life that's involved, that's just, has to happen.
And Don, working in law enforcement, we kind of spoke while the news conference was going on, talking about how the NOPD is under a consent decree. And I'm wondering if, again, they'd have to look into the safety is first. So when you're in a situation like that, these officers, is that something that you think could have hindered them because they have such strict standards and such strict requirements that they have to, and protocols that they have to abide by right now?
It certainly could have. I would hope that it didn't. I would hope that they were just relying on their law enforcement training, and that's what I would expect them to have done and not worry so much about a consent decree. But you just don't know because that was in play for so long and has been in play for so long, and there's been so much ado about it. You would hope that certain measures weren't taken because of some decree and maybe they didn't have the proper authorization to do it. I don't think that's going to end up being the case. I think they did what they needed to do to stop the threat.
And it appears that they reacted quickly. And to by every account, the police officers who ran to that scene should be lauded as heroes.
Absolutely.
They certainly stopped. We had Oliver Thomas allude this morning that they saved thousands of lives.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, hearing that the IEDs would have been there, I mean, you can imagine what potentially could have happened.
Right.
So they should certainly be applauded for that. And in that situation, though, and as someone working in the Secret Service, you have to account for the possibilities, right? However impossible they may seem.
Right.
You had that reporter there ask about, that they weren't expecting someone to drive on a sidewalk. Does it seem like the security efforts lacked if they were blocking a street but not a sidewalk, or especially knowing that these bollards that initially had been installed as permanent devices to protect against exactly this weren't working?
I think the bollards is the big piece here. Was there a lack of security? I don't know yet. I think that remains to be seen. Obviously this individual was able to get onto that sidewalk. So if there was a vehicle blocking the intersection because the bollards weren't for another block or so, then why wasn't the sidewalk also blocked off? And so those are questions that certainly need to be answered. We need to get the answers to that as to why it didn't happen. Whether it's a lack, I don't know. It depends on what comes out in this investigation.
And then I want to ask you this, because Ann Kirkpatrick was talking about the wedges that I'm sure people here might be familiar with. If you're staying in or around the French Quarter, you may have seen them. They seem to be permanent fixtures, and they're basically, I'll use my iPad to demonstrate, basically this piece of metal that comes up like this to block a car from driving through. So it can't go through because it's a giant piece of metal that's up to the hood of a car. You heard Kirkpatrick say that they didn't want to engage that for fear that what if they had to put it down and get an ambulance in there? Yeah. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is, and why would you have them in the first place? Why would you have them in the first place if it inhibits, emergency responders or paramedics? It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. If they can go up, they can go down to allow for, emergency medical technicians to get in and out of the area. So
and to piggyback on that, Rob, talking about Kirkpatrick, she was talking about how there were patrol cars there. And again, yes, the sidewalks could have been covered. That was something that they asked as well. But blaming the fact that the terrorists defeated what they had in place. That's literally what she said. What are your thoughts on that? Obviously they're saying that they did everything they could, but did they do everything they could?
Again, I think that's going to come down to the investigation. I think we'll find out whether they did or not. I certainly hope they did, and that somehow this individual was so cunning he was able to circumvent that. You would hope that they weren't just saying, hey, we'll just leave it up to the whims of what people want to do. So, hopefully they had every measure in place. But, you know, those are things that need to be said, that we did have, you know, these contingencies in place to stop it, and this is how it was circumvented.
Transparency.
Yeah. You know, you can't stop everything at all times, especially when you have soft targets, you know, where there's no choke points, there's no vetting people going in and out. It leaves it kind of open for these types of things to happen. Gunfire, you know, there's nothing really to stop that. Sometimes, you know, these things unfortunately happen. You know, it is an act of evil for sure. You know, you don't want people to do these things, but they do anyway, you know, because they hate our way of life here in America.
You heard Special Agent in Charge, Althea Duncan, there from the FBI, talking about the ISIS flag that was found on the car. Does that say anything to you in particular about where this investigation could be going?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anytime you have a terrorist organization's flag in the cab of the truck of the person that carried out the terrorist attack, that's a pretty big glaring sign. I would imagine that alone was the nexus for the FBI to take over the investigation and to begin to investigate this as terrorism. That alone would be sufficient to say, we need to follow this out, you know, to see if foreign actors are involved, or was this just a radicalized American citizen who decided to do this on his own or with very limited help.
And Don, looking forward, you know, we keep saying it, but we have the Sugar Bowl that's coming, but we also have the Super Bowl, and we saw our elected leaders on national television. It's not just us here in Louisiana, here in New Orleans. They are on national television talking about this, and they're saying, you know, it's okay. Like the governor's saying, I'm still going to go to the Sugar Bowl tomorrow, trying to say, even though this is happening in our city, it's more of like, hey, it's okay to come here, even though they are investigating a terror attack. What are your thoughts on that and that way of trying to make sure people say, okay, you can still come here, but hey, we are still investigating this very serious situation?
Again, I think it goes back to striking that balance. You know, certainly you want to let folks know if it is safe, that it is safe to come here and to participate in the events that are going on in and around the city. But you need to know that in fact is the case before you invite folks into the city to do those things. And so I hope in the next few days moving forward, we're able to find out more particular detail on how many folks were involved. Are there other plots that are being investigated, you know? And that would then dictate moving forward whether you shut things down or you allow them to happen and invite folks in. But I certainly can understand, you know, from a political standpoint that he wants to portray that they're doing everything they can and the city is safe.
Sure, and I think everyone can imagine right now that the city of New Orleans, the police department, the FBI are all working in concert right now. They're all responding in the absolute utmost way. And there are, one of the things I was told by multiple people coming in to the headquarters there, we've got every resource, don't worry.
Right.
Well, it doesn't seem like, I mean, that's not the worry of the citizen right now, is it?
No.
They're not worried if the federal government is sending resources
Right.
for these people to do an investigation, right?
The citizen wants to know, is it safe to come here? Am I going to be okay? And my physical safety is going to be okay or not? That's it.
And especially if they have business in that area or anything, are they okay to just go about there every day? Because people live here, the French Quarter, people live in the French Quarter. Like this
Right.
is where, this is their home.
Right.
So it's like, they're trying to figure out, is it safe
And-
for me to even go to the store?
Yeah, and the Sugar Bowl itself, I mean, that's a huge economic driver
Yes.
for this city, not just with the hotels and the restaurants, but that 8-block stretch of Bourbon Street between Canal and St. Anne, where many of those bars and establishments rely on this Sugar Bowl and New Year's Eve as a
Tourists,
huge
everyone
moneymaker
that's
to bring them through the slower times of the year.
Sure, it's a pivotal event in the city. It has a huge economic impact for a lot of different people. And, you know, so at the end of the day, it's about ensuring that the people who come to participate in that economic impact are going to be safe.
All right. Well, former Secret Service agent Don Lane, thank you so much for your expertise. We really do appreciate it.
You bet.
It really
It
does
really
help,
puts
you know,
perspective.
exactly, put that perspective on it. We appreciate you being here with us.
My pleasure.
And we'll stay in touch through
Yeah.
this.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks.
All right, in the